My name is Natalie Pierce, and I learned that sometimes the people who raise you aren't the ones who love you. They're just the ones who need you. The courtroom was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the nervous shuffle of my adoptive parents' lawyer, flipping through documents he already knew wouldn't save them. I sat 3 rows behind the plaintiff's table, hands folded in my lap, watching the back of Margaret's head, the woman who'd called herself my mother for 23 years. She wouldn't turn around. She hadn't looked at me once since we'd entered the building. Beside her, Richard sat with that same entitled posture I'd seen my whole life, like the world owed him something just for showing up. Have you ever been so angry that you became calm? Let me back up, because this story doesn't start in a courtroom, and it doesn't start with revenge. It starts with a 7-year-old girl who thought she'd won the lottery. I was adopted when I was 7 years old. Before that, I'd been in 3 different foster homes, each one a variation of the same theme: overworked foster parents, too many kids, not enough love to go around. I wasn't abused, not really. I was just forgotten. The kind of kid who ate dinner last, wore hand-me-downs from kids who'd already worn hand-me-downs, and learned early that asking for things only made you a burden. Then came Margaret and Richard Pierce. They were in their mid-40s, wealthy, well-dressed, and they chose me. Me. Out of all the kids at the adoption event, they picked the skinny girl with the braids and the 2 big glasses. Margaret knelt down in her expensive dress and told me I had kind eyes. Richard shook my hand like I was a grown-up. They took me to their home, a 4-bedroom colonial in a gated community, and showed me my room. My own room, with new furniture and a closet full of clothes that still had tags on them. I cried myself to sleep that first night, but they were happy tears. I thought I'd finally found my family. For a while, it was good. Better than good. Margaret took me shopping, helped me pick out outfits for school, taught me how to braid my hair in French plaits. Richard taught me how to ride a bike in their circular driveway, running beside me until I got my balance. They enrolled me in a private school, paid for piano lessons, threw me birthday parties with real cakes from bakeries instead of boxed mix. I worked so hard to be worthy of them. I made honor roll every semester. I never talked back. I kept my room spotless. I wrote them thank you notes for Christmas presents. I became the daughter they wanted. Polite, grateful, accomplished. The daughter they could show off at their country club events and dinner parties. But somewhere around my sophomore year of high school, things shifted. It was subtle at first. Margaret started making comments about my responsibility to the family. Richard began talking about investments paying off. I didn't understand what they meant. Not then. It wasn't until I was 17 that I started to piece it together. I'd come downstairs one night to get water and heard them talking in Richard's study. The door was cracked open. The tax benefits alone have been worth it, Richard was saying, plus the optics with Richard's firm. Having an adopted daughter shows compassion, family values. It's helped with 3 major clients. And she's so easy, Margaret added. Not like Sarah's daughter. You remember, the one who went through that rebellious phase? Natalie just does what she's told. She'll be fine with helping out when the time comes. I stood in the hallway, barefoot on their Italian tile, and felt something crack inside my chest. I was 17 years old, and I suddenly understood that I wasn't their daughter. I was their project, their tax write-off, their proof of good character. But I didn't have anywhere else to go. So I swallowed that knowledge like bitter medicine and kept being the perfect daughter. Because what choice did I have? I graduated as valedictorian. I got into Northwestern University with a partial scholarship. I studied finance and economics because Richard had suggested it would be practical. I came home for holidays and smiled in their Christmas card photos. I introduced them to my college boyfriend Marcus and watched Margaret evaluate him like a prize at a county fair. After graduation, I got a job at a financial consulting firm in Chicago. It was a good job. Great benefits, room for advancement, enough money to start building my own life. I rented a small apartment in Lincoln Park. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. For the first time since I was 7 years old, I was building something that belonged to me. That's when the phone call started. "Natalie, darling, we need to talk about something important," Margaret said one Sunday afternoon. I was doing laundry, phone tucked between my ear and shoulder. "Your father and I are getting older, and we need to make sure our affairs are in order." "Okay," I said, folding a towel. "Are you updating your will or something?" "Well, yes, but there's more to it than that. We've made some investments over the years that haven't performed as well as we'd hoped. The market has been difficult, and we're facing some financial pressures." I stopped folding. "What kind of financial pressures?" "Nothing for you to worry about," she said quickly. "But we were hoping you might be able to help us out, just temporarily until we get back on our feet. You're doing so well at your job, and we did provide you with such a wonderful education." There it was, the bill finally coming due. "How much are we talking about?" I asked. "Well, we'd need to sit down and discuss the details, but probably around $60,000 to start, to cover some debts and help with the mortgage payments." $60,000. More than a year of my salary after taxes and expenses. "Mom, I don't have that kind of money," I said. "I'm 25 years old. I'm still paying off my student loans for the part of tuition the scholarship didn't cover." "Student loans that we co-signed for," Margaret reminded me. Her voice had gone cold. "We gave you everything, Natalie. A home, an education, opportunities. Is it really too much to ask for a little help when we need it?" The guilt was immediate and crushing. She was right, wasn't she? They had given me everything. I owed them. Of course I owed them. "Let me look at my finances," I said finally. "I'll see what I can do." "That's my girl," Margaret said, warmth flooding back into her voice. "I knew we could count on you." I hung up and stared at my half-folded laundry. My hands were shaking. Marcus found me an hour later, still sitting on the floor of my bedroom, bank statements spread around me like tarot cards predicting a grim future. "Babe, what's wrong?" He sat down beside me, picking up one of the statements. "Why are you doing this on a Sunday?" I told him about the phone call, about the money, about the guilt that was eating me alive. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. He was an attorney, had just passed the bar and started working at a small firm that handled civil cases. He had a way of processing information carefully before speaking. One of the things I loved about him. "Nat," he said finally, "you don't owe them your financial security." "They raised me," I said. "They gave me everything. They chose to adopt you. That was their decision. You were a child. You didn't sign a contract promising to pay them back for basic parenting." "It's not that simple, isn't it?" He picked up another statement. "You have $12,000 in student loan debt. You're paying $1,500 a month in rent, and you're trying to build an emergency fund. If you give them $60,000, how exactly are you going to do that? Do they expect you to take out loans, go into debt for them?" "They said it would be temporary." "Natalie," Marcus took my hand. "I love you, but you need to hear this. What they're asking isn't reasonable. It's not fair. And it's definitely not temporary. If you give them money once, they'll keep asking." I wanted to argue with him. I wanted to defend Margaret and Richard, to explain that he didn't understand how much they'd done for me. But somewhere deep down, in a place I'd been ignoring since I was 17 years old, I knew he was right. I called Margaret back 3 days later and told her I couldn't give them the money, that I didn't have it, and that taking on that kind of debt would destroy the financial stability I was trying to build. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long, I thought the call had dropped. "I see," Margaret said finally. Her voice was ice. "So after everything we've done for you, you're going to abandon us in our time of need." "I'm not abandoning you," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. "I just can't. We took you out of foster care, Natalie. We gave you a life. We gave you everything. And this is how you repay us? Mom, please. Don't call me that, she snapped. A real daughter wouldn't turn her back on her parents. A real daughter would understand loyalty and gratitude. But I suppose we should have expected this. You can take the girl out of foster care, but you can't take the foster care out of the girl. The words hit me like a slap. I stood in my apartment, phone pressed to my ear, and felt 20 years of carefully constructed identity crumble into dust. That's not fair, I whispered. You know what's not fair? Spending 20 years raising an ungrateful child who can't be bothered to help when we need her. Your father and I are very disappointed in you, Natalie. Very disappointed indeed. She hung up. I called back. She didn't answer. I tried Richard's phone. Nothing. I sent texts, emails. Silence. A week later, I got a Facebook message from Margaret's sister, my Aunt Caroline. She'd always been kind to me at family gatherings, slipping me extra cookies and asking about school. The message was short. I'm sorry, Natalie, but I've been asked to remove you from the family group chat. Margaret says you've made your choice. That's when I understood. This wasn't just anger. This was exile. Over the next month, I reached out to every family member I could think of. My Aunt Caroline stopped responding after that first message. My cousin Jessica, who I'd shared secrets with at Thanksgiving dinners, blocked me on social media. Richard's brother Tom, who taught me how to play chess, sent me a brief email saying he didn't want to get involved in family drama. One by one, every connection I had to the Pierce family disappeared. It was like I'd been erased. Marcus held me while I cried. They're showing you who they really are, he said softly. Believe them. I tried to move on. I threw myself into work, picked up extra projects, stayed at the office late. I went to therapy and talked about abandonment and conditional love and learning to build my own identity. I was getting better, slowly, learning to live with the grief of losing a family I'd never really had. Then, 6 months after that phone call, I got served with papers. Richard and Margaret Pierce were suing me for $847,000. I sat in my apartment, holding the lawsuit, reading words that didn't make sense. Breach of verbal contract, unjust enrichment, compensation for child-rearing expenses including education, housing, food, clothing, extracurricular activities, and medical care from ages 7 to 23. They had itemized it. Every piano lesson, every birthday party, every winter coat. They'd kept receipts for 16 years and calculated it all with interest. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the papers. They were suing me. They were actually suing me for the cost of raising me. I called Marcus. He came over immediately, still in his work clothes, and read through the entire lawsuit twice. This is insane, he said finally. This is legally insane. You can't bill someone for raising them. That's not how adoption works. That's not how anything works. Can they do this? I asked. Can they actually take me to court? They can file a lawsuit. Anyone can file a lawsuit. But winning it? He shook his head. Not a chance. This will get thrown out immediately. But it didn't get thrown out. The judge allowed it to proceed to discovery, saying that while the case was highly unusual, both parties deserved the opportunity to present their arguments. Suddenly, I needed a lawyer. Marcus couldn't represent me. Conflict of interest because of our relationship, but he helped me find someone. Her name was Jennifer Chen, and she was a partner at a mid-sized firm that handled civil litigation. She was in her 40s, with silver-streaked black hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. This is one of the most ethically repugnant cases I've seen in 20 years of practice, Jennifer said at our first meeting. She was reading through the lawsuit, her expression growing darker with each page. But your parents have expensive lawyers, and they're clearly willing to drag this out. We need to be prepared for a fight. I don't understand how this is even possible, I said. Don't I have any protection? Normally, yes. Adoption creates the same legal parent-child relationship as biological birth. Parents can't sue their children for child-rearing costs any more than they can send them a bill for food and shelter. But your parents' lawyers are being creative. They're arguing that you made verbal promises of future financial support, that you benefited from their investment in ways that go beyond normal parenting, and that your refusal to help constitutes a breach of implied family contract. She looked up at me. It's garbage, but it's clever garbage. Discovery was brutal. Margaret and Richard's lawyers requested every financial document I had: bank statements, tax returns, pay stubs, credit card bills. They deposed me for 8 hours, asking invasive questions about my salary, my spending habits, my relationship with Marcus. They wanted to prove I had the money and was simply being selfish. Jennifer fought back. She subpoenaed their financial records and found that their financial pressures were the result of Richard's gambling problem and Margaret's shopping addiction. They weren't struggling to pay their mortgage. They were struggling to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't afford, and they decided I was their solution. But the worst part wasn't the legal proceedings. It was the public humiliation. Margaret and Richard went on social media. They created a Facebook post that went viral in our community, painting themselves as heartbroken parents who'd given everything to an ungrateful adopted daughter who'd abandoned them in their hour of need. They left out the part about the lawsuit, about the money they were demanding. They just told everyone I'd turn my back on family. The comments were vicious. People I'd gone to high school with called me selfish and cruel. Parents from the neighborhood where I'd grown up posted long diatribes about ungrateful children and the decline of family values. Someone created a hashtag, ungrateful Natalie. I stopped looking at social media. I stopped going to my favorite coffee shop after the barista gave me a dirty look. I felt like I was drowning in other people's judgment, suffocating under the weight of a story I had no way to correct. Marcus wanted me to fight back, to tell my side publicly. Jennifer advised against it. "Don't play their game," she said. "Keep your head down and let me handle this in court. That's where it matters." But Jennifer was building something. I didn't know what, not at first. She was spending hours on my case, interviewing people, pulling records, making calls. She brought in a paralegal who'd specialized in adoption law. They were constructing something, piece by piece. 3 months before the trial date, Jennifer called me into her office. She looked tired but satisfied, like a chess player who'd just seen the winning move. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did Margaret and Richard ever record conversations with you? Do they have the kind of smart home setup with always-on devices?" I thought about it. They have Alexa devices in most rooms. They got them a few years ago. Why? Jennifer smiled. It wasn't a nice smile, because I've been going through their financial records very carefully, and I found something interesting. They've been paying for cloud storage, a lot of cloud storage, more than you'd need for photos and documents. I don't understand. They've been recording everything, Natalie, every conversation in their house, every phone call made on their landline. They've been keeping it all, probably thinking they'd find evidence of you promising to support them financially. But here's the thing about recording everything. You capture the things you don't want captured too. My heart started pounding. Can we get those recordings? We can subpoena them, and I think we should. But I need you to prepare yourself. If they've been recording for years, there might be things on there that are hard to hear. Things about you, about why they adopted you, about how they really see you. I thought about that conversation I'd overheard when I was 17, about tax benefits and optics and investments paying off. "Get the recordings," I said. It took 6 weeks and multiple court orders, but Jennifer got them. Hundreds of hours of audio files, stored in the cloud, documented and dated. Jennifer's team spent 3 weeks going through everything, pulling relevant sections. She played some of them for me in her office. I only made it through 5 recordings before I had to stop. There was Margaret, 2 weeks after they'd adopted me, telling her sister, "She's so grateful for everything. It's actually sad. She said thank you 3 times for a used bookshelf. This is going to be easier than I thought." There was Richard, talking to his business partner. "The adoption looks great on paper. Family-oriented, charitable. It's already helped with the Henderson account. They eat this stuff up. There was Margaret, from when I was 14. Sometimes I forget she's even here. She's so quiet and obedient. Nothing like Sarah's nightmare daughter. We really got lucky with this one. And there was a recording from 2 months before the lawsuit was filed. Margaret and Richard plotting in their living room. "She's not going to give us the money willingly," Margaret said. "Then we'll make her," Richard replied. "We have all the receipts, every cent we spent on her. We'll take her to court and make her pay us back. She owes us." Will that work legally? Doesn't matter if we actually win. The threat alone might be enough to force her to settle. And if not, we'll at least get a judgment we can use to garnish her wages. Either way, we get our money. "What about her reputation?" Richard laughed. "What about it? We'll destroy it. We'll tell everyone she abandoned us. We'll make her look like the most ungrateful person alive. She'll be so desperate to make it stop. She'll pay us just to go away." I sat in Jennifer's office, listening to the people who'd raised me plot my financial and social destruction, and I felt something inside me finally break free from its chains. It wasn't grief anymore. It was clarity. "I want to use this," I said. "All of it." Jennifer nodded slowly. "It's going to be ugly. Once this comes out, there's no going back." "Good," I said. "I don't want to go back." The trial started on a cold morning in March. The courtroom was half full. Some people from the neighborhood who'd been following the ungrateful daughter story, a few journalists covering it as a human interest piece. Margaret and Richard sat at their table, both dressed immaculately, looking every inch the wounded, dignified parents. I sat behind Jennifer, wearing the same gray suit I'd worn to job interviews, my hair pulled back, my face carefully neutral. Their lawyer went first. He was good. I had to give him that. He painted Margaret and Richard as devoted parents who'd opened their hearts and home to a child in need. He showed photos of me at various ages, birthday parties, piano recitals, graduation. He presented the itemized list of expenses with the solemnity of a prosecutor, presenting evidence of a heinous crime. "The Pierces gave this young woman every advantage," he said, gesturing toward me. "They loved her, supported her, invested in her future, and when they asked for help in return, just once, she turned her back on them. She refused to honor the family bond that they had nurtured for 16 years. This lawsuit isn't about money. It's about accountability. It's about recognizing that when a family gives everything to a child, that child has a moral, and we argue legal, obligation to provide support in return." Some people in the gallery were nodding. I could feel their judgment like heat on my skin. Then it was our turn. Jennifer stood up. She didn't walk to the podium. She stood right beside our table, close enough that I could see her hands were steady. "Your Honor," she said, "opposing counsel has told you a story about devoted parents and an ungrateful child. I'm going to tell you the truth. And unlike my opponent, I have evidence." She nodded to her paralegal, who wheeled in a small audio system. What the Pierces didn't know, or perhaps didn't care about, is that their smart home devices have been recording conversations in their house for years. These recordings were legally subpoenaed from their cloud storage account. I'm going to play a selection of them now, and I think they'll tell a very different story than the one we've just heard. Margaret's face went white. Richard leaned over to whisper something urgent to their lawyer. Jennifer played the first recording. It was Richard, from 6 months after my adoption. "The best thing about this is the tax deduction, $8,000 a year, right off the top. Plus, it makes us look good for the partnership review." She played another. Margaret talking to a friend. "Honestly, having Natalie has been so convenient. She's like a little maid who thanks you for letting her clean. I barely have to do anything." She played more. Conversation after conversation, year after year. Margaret and Richard discussing the return on investment of my private school education. Richard explaining to someone how the adoption had helped him secure 3 major clients. Margaret bragging to her sister about how easy I was to control because I was so desperate to be loved. The courtroom was silent, except for their voices coming through the speakers. I watched the backs of their heads. Margaret's shoulders were rigid. Richard had one hand over his face. Then Jennifer played the recording from 2 months before the lawsuit, their plan to destroy my reputation, to force me to settle, to garnish my wages if necessary. "Your Honor," Jennifer said when the audio ended, "this lawsuit has nothing to do with family obligation or moral accountability. This is extortion. The Pierces adopted my client not out of love, but for their own benefit, financial, social, and professional. They treated her well when she served their purposes, and when she declined to continue funding their lifestyle, they attempted to destroy her reputation and sue her for the cost of basic child rearing that they were legally and ethically obligated to provide." She pulled out another document. "Furthermore, we have evidence that the Pierces claim my client as a dependent on their taxes every year from her adoption until she turned 24, receiving substantial tax benefits. They deducted her expenses each year. They cannot now claim those same expenses as a debt she owes. That would be, in layman's terms, double dipping." Their lawyer stood up, objecting, arguing, but his voice sounded hollow. The recordings had done their work. Jennifer wasn't finished. She called witnesses, my therapist, who testified about the psychological harm of transactional parenting, a financial expert who explained that the Pierces' financial problems were entirely of their own making, an adoption specialist who testified that what the Pierces had done, treating adoption as an investment expecting returns, violated every ethical principle of adoption. Then Jennifer called me to the stand. I walked up slowly, placed my hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth. I sat down and looked out at the courtroom, at the judge, who was watching me with something that might have been sympathy, at Marcus, sitting in the back row, giving me an encouraging nod, at Margaret and Richard, who still wouldn't look at me. Jennifer asked me simple questions. How old was I when I was adopted? What was my life like before the Pierces? How I felt when they chose me. "I thought I'd won the lottery," I said quietly. "I thought I'd finally found people who wanted me just for being me." "When did you start to realize that might not be true?" I told the court about the conversation I'd overheard when I was 17, about the years of performing perfection, trying to be worthy of their investment, about the phone call asking for $60,000, about the guilt that had nearly drowned me. "Did you refuse to help them because you're ungrateful?" Jennifer asked. "No," I said. "I refused because what they were asking would have destroyed my financial security, and because a small part of me, the part that had been listening and watching for years, knew that if I gave them money once, it would never stop. They didn't want help. They wanted an ATM." "Do you love them?" The question caught me off guard. I looked at Margaret and Richard, really looked at them. Richard's jaw was tight. Margaret's hands were clenched in her lap. "I loved who I thought they were," I said finally. "I loved the parents I wanted them to be. But the people in those recordings, the ones who saw me as an investment and a tax deduction, I don't know if I ever really knew them." The trial lasted 3 more days, but everyone knew it was over. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes and came back with a verdict. Not only did they dismiss the lawsuit entirely, but they awarded me damages for emotional distress and ordered Margaret and Richard to pay my legal fees. It wasn't enough to make me rich, but it was enough to cover everything Jennifer had charged and help me rebuild my savings. But the money wasn't the real victory. The real victory was watching their lawyer pack up his briefcase with shaking hands. It was seeing Margaret finally turn around to look at me as we left the courtroom, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. It was knowing that every person who'd called me ungrateful, every family member who'd exiled me, every neighbor who judged me, would now hear those recordings. The story went viral, but this time the narrative was different. The audio clips circulated on social media. The hashtag changed to "Dogger Justice for Natalie." The same people who'd condemn me were now tripping over themselves to apologize, to claim they'd always had doubts about the Pierce's story. I didn't respond to any of them. I didn't need to. 3 months after the trial, Marcus and I got married. It was a small ceremony. Just us, a few close friends, his family who'd welcomed me with the kind of warmth I'd always craved. His mother cried when I called her mom for the first time, and it felt right in a way that had never felt right with Margaret. I got a promotion at work. I moved to a bigger apartment. I planted herbs in window boxes and learned that I liked cooking. I adopted a cat from a shelter, an older cat that nobody wanted, and named her Lucky. I built a life that was mine, with people who chose me not because of what I could do for them, but because of who I was. Margaret and Richard sent one email 6 months after the trial. It was short. "We're sorry things ended this way. We hope you can forgive us someday." I deleted it without responding. Some things don't deserve forgiveness. Some things just deserve to be left behind. On the anniversary of the trial, Jennifer and I had coffee at a cafe downtown. She'd become more than my lawyer. She was my friend, my mentor, the kind of person I wanted to be when I was her age. "How are you doing?" she asked, stirring sugar into her espresso. "Really?" I thought about it. "I'm good," I said, and I meant it. "Better than good. I'm free." "No regrets?" "None," I said. They tried to make me believe that I owed them for my own existence, that being chosen meant being owned. But here's what I know now. Being someone's daughter shouldn't cost you your soul. Jennifer raised her cup. "To freedom," she said. "To freedom," I echoed. I still think about them sometimes. About Margaret teaching me to French braid my hair, about Richard teaching me to ride a bike. I think about the good moments and wonder how many of them were real and how many were just performances. But mostly I think about the girl I used to be, the one who believed love had to be earned through perfection, who thought gratitude meant erasing herself. That girl is gone now. In her place is a woman who knows her worth, who built her own family, who understands that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to pay a debt you don't actually owe. I'm Natalie Pierce. I kept the last name because changing it felt like running, and I was done running. And I learned that the opposite of gratitude isn't ingratitude. It's self-respect. And that's a lesson you can't put a price on.